It is my distinct honor and pleasure to have Blue Note tone poet, producer Joe Harley here today on the Zoom couch. Hi, Joe.
How you doing, Ken?
I'm doing very well. Let me tell you all a little bit about Joe Harley that you may not know. Beyond his current role as producer of the Blue Note Tone Poet Reissue series, which includes overseeing sound, packaging, and choice of titles, Joe Harley is best known for his production work for various labels over the last 27 years, including AudioQuest, Telarc, Enja, ECM, and Groove Note, and of course, Music Matters, where he began remastering Blue Note records with Kevin Gray of Coherent in 2007. Joe has produced over 100 well-regarded blues and jazz titles, including the Grammy-nominated Delta Crossroads by Robert Lockwood Jr., and he's worked with musicians including Charles Lloyd, Benny Wallace, John Abercrombie, Anthony Wilson, Brad Meldau, Diana Krall, Mike Stern, Ry Cooder, and mighty Sam McLean. And I didn't know this till Joe just told me today. He also worked as creative director of the JVC XRCD program, which are a fantastic sounding line of CDs, if you can find them, and now quite collectible. Regarding his Music Matters work, and I believe this applies to his Tone Poet series with Kevin Gray, Joe has said, Ron Rombach and I were shocked at how great the master tape sounded compared to the countless original pressing LPs we have heard over the years, mostly from our complete collections. We do not roll out the low end, boost the top, or do limiting of any kind. We allow the full glory of the original Blue Note masters to come through unimpeded. Short of having an actual time machine, this is as close as you can get to being a fly on the wall for an original Blue Note recording session, which is what we all really want at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, we, in fact, I'll tell you a little. It's not a secret, I guess, but we never have mentioned it before. At least I haven't, and I don't think Ron ever did either. When we first started talking about doing a reissue program, we initially, our vision was to have Rudy cut everything.
Wow, really?
It was when we first started talking about it. And I forget who, I'd known Michael Kaskuna is a dear friend. I've known him for, I've lost track of the years. Wow. But I think it was Michael who said he's not going to do that. He's not going to get the lathe running again. And, his focus is on a different thing, which was digital. And so, we had to well, okay, that's not going to happen. So what do we do? And I'd been really impressed with, I'd worked with Bernie Grumman for years and still do on occasion. He's a great friend. I'd been really impressed with what Kevin Gray had been doing. And so I contacted him, and he said, hell yeah, of course I'd like to do that. And Michael was involved. Michael was key, in fact. EMI owned Blue Note in those days. This is before Universal took over. And they didn't know us from a hill of beans, really. I mean, they knew some of the records I'd done with other labels, but they didn't know much. But Michael was really the go-between, the liaison with the EMI world.
Wow.
And so, I mean, all hats off to him. He helped make that happen.
When you and Kevin are at Coherent, you're the producer. What does a mastering engineer do, which is what I believe Kevin is?
That's right. So I guess the short way of putting it, a simple way of putting it is, so you have the master tape, and what you're doing in mastering is you're preparing to present that material to the world. And by that, I mean, if we're talking LPs, which we are, you're going to take those raw tracks. They're sequenced. In the case of everything from Rudy, those masters, they're in sequence, side A, side B.
Huh.
But, a lot of times levels will be different. You'll go, so to give you an idea, you'll play the whole thing down. We'll run it down. listen to every track, and frequently you'll run across, all of a sudden, the level drops on the next track. There's no particular reason why. It's happened to me too, many, many times when you're doing a session, especially live to two, live to two track, which sometimes people forget. These are all live to two track recordings. And, why is the level lower? Who knows? Who knows? Why is it lower? It doesn't, and people don't really want to be jumping up and down. It's like, oh, okay, this track 2 is a whole lot lower in level than track 1. I got to turn it up. You don't want to be distracted with stuff like that when you're listening. You want someone to have done that for you. So that's on a real basic level. That's one of the things. The other is, and again, this applies to live to two-track recording. No exceptions for anyone. I've done a ton of it with a guy named Mike Ross, and he's a great engineer. And Rudy, there's no like, okay, bass player, you missed it. You missed an inference over there, so we're going to punch your note in. That there is nothing like that in live to two. You're mixing as the music's being played, as it's going down. So it's really hard to do, believe me. And it's incredible what Rudy was able to do. You really kind of need two people to do it, because you need someone who's watching what's going on to kind of clue you. Trumpet solo, so that the engineer's down there watching what he's watching, and you need someone to be able to say, okay, in his case, Lee Morgan solo.
Paid rehearsals didn't happen at Van Gelder Studios, I guess.
They didn't happen at Van Gelder's, no. But you kind of have to know who's, what the order is. And you'll hear, this happens on Van Gelder recordings. You'll hear times when somebody comes in hot. Maybe the trumpet player's too close to, they're not wearing headphones. So, they're playing acoustic. And, could be Freddie or Lee or somebody is opens up his solo and is right on the mic and is blazing. And you can hear Rudy diving for that fader.
Wow.
And so, yes, there are moments when there can be brief overload, because that's what happened. And
you can correct that in the remastering?
No.
No.
If it's overloaded to tape, that's it. What you got. Now, you can reduce level, but you can't fix what went to tape. In that regard, if you're talking about overloading of the tape and there's a little no. And it's an interesting question you ask, because as the contemporary mastering, and especially with people like Kevin, you're hearing more than you've ever heard before. These are like really revealing systems. It's amazing because you feel like you're there, but it's also like you plow up some of the stuff that on the systems of the day and the speaker systems of the day probably got glossed over a bit, probably got smoothed over.
He was probably using Altex or something. Do you have any idea what he was using?
I think you're right. Yeah, I should know this. I think they were Altex, but I wouldn't want to stake my life on it. But I think
does that mean he was using tube amps? He probably went to solid state as soon as he could, I bet.
You're right about that. He was using, so, not to go too far off track here, but with Rudy, you're talking about all these different eras. So you have the Hackensack era, and we run into, Kevin and I have done like hundreds of these now. So, you run into certain things in certain eras, and certain problems present themselves. But yeah, in the Hackensack days, yes, your all tube, Inglewood Cliffs, early on. There's still some tubes, but as soon as solid state kind of became more popular, Rudy jumped on it really right away. He's a gearhead, and he loved any new technology. He loved that. Wow. So yeah, you get different things happening, and different sonic things present themselves depending on the era that you're dealing with.
What are Kevin Gray's playback monitors?
Well, they are completely different than what I have here, and yet I feel totally at home in front of them. Tonally, the tonal balance of his speakers, which are extremely wide range, I feel like it's a mirror image of what I'm hearing here, which means you have a nice clean pair of glasses when you're at his place, because I know what happens there is going to translate here and translate well to the rest of the world. But to answer your question, he built them himself.
Oh.
So using different drivers, but it's his design. His whole rig is custom, basically. His whole, the cutting amps, the whole chain, it might look like a Sontec EQ, but he's torn it all apart and modified it. Pure Class A output, transformerless. It's a pretty wicked system.
Wow, he's OTL. Wow, that's super transparent. And what are your? I hadn't really thought about that. Obviously, you take test pressings home. What are you listening? What are your speakers there?
At home, so I'm looking over here because I'm looking at my system. Vandersteen 7 speakers, Audio Research, Phono and Pre, Air MRX mono amplifiers, a pretty wild turntable from Basis called a Transcendence, Phono cartridges by Lyra, and the DAC is really great. It's by Aesthetics.
One of the things you all do is address levels. What else what are the other considerations when you guys are running the tape back? What are you and Kevin Gray listening to, and what needs to change sometimes?
There are times it's not, it's sort of infrequent, but, it's always amazing when it happens, where we sit there and we run it down and we just kind of look at each other and go, man, sounds great. And we don't do anything.
But what's
levels?
Right. Level-wise,
always have to do levels.
But what are the other? I'm not even quite sure what the tools are. I know it's not like you're a mixing engineer. What the mastering engineer does is limited to certain parameters.
Tonal balance, that comes up where maybe for whatever reason something is coming in really bright, and people would think it'd be exactly the same at Rudy's from one day to the next. We've done sessions where, unbeknownst to us, you look at the date and it's like, wow, this was recorded on Friday and this was recorded on Saturday the next day, and they sound different. Different group, but they sound different. And so there can be times when the low end needs help. It's particularly, it comes up on records where there's B3. You have to understand, in the 50s and 60s, for a label like Blue Note or Prestige or any of these smaller, the bane of their existence was returns. You don't want returns. Why do people return a record? In those days, primarily because it skipped. Why does it skip? It skips because there's too much low frequency information, and the cartridge of that time couldn't handle it, So I mean, there are other reasons. It could be a scratch or whatever, but assuming the vinyl's fine. And so very commonly, Rudy would roll off the extreme low end. I've mentioned this in other places, but he's very, very clever. Instead of just eliminating bass, he would reduce the frequencies that got styli into treble and put a little boost in around 80 hertz, thereabout. So you listen to those and you don't go, gee, where's the bass? It's there, it's not extended, but there's a bass hump, and so you do feel some bass. On the records with B3, frequently the bass pedals are reduced to a point where it's it's like the groove of the thing is not happening right, because if that's your bass player as the bass pedals, as is the case with so many B3 records. We had one just sitting over there the other day, a record we did, it's not out yet, but it's called Steppin' Out by Harold Vick.
Oh, wow. Huh,
and
cool.
John Patton's on it. And I've got an original, I've got tons of originals. And I love the music. I love everything about it. But it's like, where's the bass? Where's, like, this is such an amazing groove record. And where's the low end on this thing? And we put up the tape, and there's certainly more low end on the tape than on the final pressing, on the original pressing. But it's still, I'm sure he was anticipating, I gotta, I'm gonna have to be careful cutting this. And so we would play it back, and nothing too radical, but we boost a little bit to make sure that you could feel those bass pedals. I mean, that comes up a lot. That's just in my mind because it's something that happened recently, and I just got the test pressings not too long ago, and it's pretty wild when you compare the difference. It's like the record sounds bigger, and you just you get lost in it, and you're tapping your feet and going, and the other, it's like, wow, they didn't have a bass player because you can barely hear it.
Wow.
Anyway, that can happen. There's times when, for whatever reason, could be you can't hear Billy Higgins' cymbals like you should, for who knows why. Mics were set up a little too high, or I wasn't there, so I don't know. But if we play back and we hear something along those lines, then we'll play with that a little bit. With Rudy, you never have to do much. We're talking really subtle stuff here. Nothing. I can't remember anything radical. We've had more radical moves on modern recordings, but not with Rudy.
Just like you and Kevin have a mastering console that goes to signal to the lathe, Rudy had the same thing. So he was making decisions. I've never actually thought about that, but he was making his decisions.
Right.
You can change those final decisions. That's really interesting.
Well, we do. I'll tell you why. I've said this before, but I think he was really a genius. He's dealing with the systems of that time. And when you think of the typical system of 1958, let's say, I'm old enough that I remember. And the top end of a lot of that stuff was a little droopy. We don't think of it now
soft?
That way.
You mean soft, droopy?
A little rolled off. And without real extension, they tended to be sort of mid-range dominant, and then the low end would kind of roll and the top would kind of roll. This is before the days of, now we have Now that's not a problem. In fact, I could argue that sometimes speakers go too far in the other direction. But in those days, it was quite different. And so, he's, again, really cleverly thinking of what the final user is going to likely have. And you had to think in terms of, he wasn't thinking in terms of audiophile systems because they hardly existed. And what they had was quite different. You have to think in terms of this record's got to play on damn near anything, because who's buying Blue Note records, man? They might be using essentially a kiddie player, It had to play. And that really affects how you deal with the final result. It really comes into it. So he would compress. And you can see that in the notes. He would compress so that the thing would sound exciting and lively. And then he would very frequently put a little bump in the upper mid-range, again, to make that thing more lively. So on those older systems, it's pretty cool, It's pretty cool.
So were you able, or did you talk to Rudy at some point about his decisions and all that before he passed?
No, I don't think he would have appreciated that. No, we didn't. Michael said that we sent some albums out there, but he didn't play them. I'm not totally sure if he had a turntable that he was using at that time, but he liked the artwork. He said something like, nice pictures or something like that. But he didn't listen to them.
Wow. So he experimented a lot, because I know, just unlike contemporary, which seems to be one sound, Blue Note records are all over the place. I mean, granted, Blue Note, I guess, covers a broader range of years, but he liked to experiment, didn't he? He was a gear, like you said.
Yeah, for sure. The microphones change, the gear changes as you get into the mid-60s, and then eventually you get to 69, and finally he embraces multitrack. And all of a sudden you see in the session photos, they're wearing headphones. And so there's isolation, and you end up with, eventually he did all those CTI records around that time. And it's a very, very different sound because people are isolated. And he can go back and mix.
Do you think, since Francis Wolff was there a lot, was he making some of the calls? Because Blue Notes don't necessarily sound like Impulse records, etc.
Yeah. Alfred Lyon certainly had a sound that he had in mind, and Rudy gave it to him. And when Alfred eventually retired, and Francis took over, and then Duke Pearson did some of those sessions as well. The two of them, it doesn't really, I don't notice any particular sonic change. I think Rudy at that point kept doing what he had been doing. So if you get an Alfred Lyon produced record from 1965 and you got a Francis Wolff produced one from 1967 or 8, sonically they're very similar.
Do you think the Hackensack sound different than the Englewood Cliffs records?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, right. Little small space.
Yeah.
The extremely intimate sound.
Very intimate. And, he's using different reverbs early on, spring reverb, which has its own kind of charm. And he's using everything's tube. So he's got tube mics and everything's tube.
Wow.
That's all they have.
I want to start these many questions we have. You think it's true, or is it just myth that he was secretive about his miking process? When people were taking photos, he'd move all the mics around. You think he could be really bothered with all that?
I don't think so. when you have a session and especially you're mixing on the fly, you're not going to have time for stuff like that. I mean, did he maybe do it once and that became lore? I don't know. I really don't know. But those sessions require a lot of focus, and he wouldn't have had time for that kind of thing.
Right. Steve Gutenberg, the audiophiliac, the man who asked me to start a channel in the first place, asked, do you listen to previous versions and how you can improve over what's come before as far as the Blue Note releases?
Of course. Yeah. When I'm sort of sorting out which titles we're going to release, and, on a nightly basis, I'm listening to titles that might be potential release for 2023, 24, 25. You're
listening at home.
Yes. And those are, what am I listening to? I'm listening to, I'm not going to say I own every single Blue Note ever made as an original, but I've got a lot of them. I have, this is funny because we just cut this not long ago, but this Kenny Burrell, self-titled with the Warhol cover. I brought it to mastering and I was showing it to Kevin, and we played a little of it. And, it dawned on me, oh yeah, this is like not only an original, this is a pretty old record, but this is, I think, in the parlance of collectors, it's a Lexington flat, it's a
flat rim. Whoa, that's the deal.
Right. And the lead out groove doesn't, it does this,
I hadn't thought about that. Right.
Yeah. And they had no writing on the spines in those days. There was no, the spines didn't say anything. So, but anyway, Kevin was like, I was in a stack and whatever we were doing that day, and Kevin said, God, this is like you bought it yesterday. And I said, yeah, I probably had it. I can't even, probably got it when I was in high school. I can't remember.
Do you have mostly, for comparison purposes, do you have mostly first pressings or second or third pressings?
A ton of first. I don't get, I know there's like, all this stuff, you can look at, the font in the label or something. If they have what they call a deep groove, I just know I bought these when they came out. And I bought them probably when I was 8 or 9 years old. I started buying Blue Notes and was always fanatic about record care and all that stuff. But Kevin, when we were out there, he gave me a plastic sleeve. He goes, this is like it was made yesterday. You should put it in the sleeve. And I went,
you should.
Right, I should. So he gave me a sleeve, and I was like, yeah, I should be more cognizant of that sort of thing. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, I'd listen to what I have, and there are a couple of exceptions, but mostly they're very early or first pressings. And I've learned I listen strictly for the music at that point. I don't get too caught up in the sonics, because I've learned many times over that what you might hear on the pressing versus what you will hear on the master can be quite different. And so records in the first years when Ron and I were doing things, records that we thought, it doesn't sound that good, we should pass. And then you get the master in and you go, whoa, my God, this thing sounds amazing. And so you start to learn to take what sonics you hear with a grain of salt, knowing that the master might present in a very different way. And so I listen to strictly to, do I dig the music or don't I? And fortunately, personally, I like all phases of Blue Note. I like the out stuff. I like the B3 stuff. I like the hard, I like all of it. So that gives a very wide, same with Pacific Jazz. and some of the other labels, gives you a wide palette to work with. And I get letters. I'm sure you can appreciate this. I get notes from people because jazz fans are so passionate.
Nuts.
So great. But they're so, man, you can talk about politics and the divisions there, but boy, the jazz collecting world is intense. And I've gotten things saying, Joe, enough with the hard bop. Would you just stop? Just do the Dolphy stuff. Take it out, brother. I get this kind of stuff. I got one the other day. A guy said, as far as I'm concerned, you should stick with, B3 is where it's at. And there's so many B3. You could just do nothing but Jimmy Smith, and I'd buy them all. And some of this. So anyway, you're not going to please everybody. It's not possible. And you just accept it. It's like, I try to be careful about the pairings. If something's a little out, then I'll pair it with something that's a little in.
Because you tend to do two at a time, right?
Tend to do two
at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, you may not dig that one, but you probably dig this one.